Michael Savage, a host like no other.
Welcome back to the Savage Nation. Now, here's a topic that none of the politicians talked about at any of the debates, nor has the President of the United States talked about it. Where does your penicillin come from? Your vitamin C, your other drugs, your other over-the-counter products, they come from the United States? Where do your antibiotics, antidepressants, birth control pills, cancer drugs, blood pressure medicines? You think they're made here in the U.S.? You're wrong. They come from China. And there's a big risk right now because we're so dependent on China for medicine, and the government is hiding this from you, that with the throwing of a switch, they could cut off your drugs. Even your vitamin C is not made here anymore. I don't know if you know this. It's an important book called China RX by Rosemary Gibson, who is joining us right now on the Savage Nation. Pay very close attention because neither party will tell you what you're about to hear because all of them are sold out and owned by the lobbyists. Rosemary Gibson, thank you for being with us on the Savage Nation. Great book.
Well, thank you for having me to talk about this very important subject.
You know, when I looked at your book, I was alarmed enough to see that all of our drugs are controlled by them. But with the wide-scale dispensation, dispensing rather, of drugs to our military, what if China cut off the antidepressants that are so frequently given out to our sailors and our soldiers? What would happen then?
And what happens if we cut off the antibiotics and the medicines needed for surgery?
Right. And they own it all. They control it all. None of them are made here in the U.S. anymore, Rosemary?
The core ingredients is where China has a chokehold on the global supply.
Boy, are they smart. Just like they cornered the market on the essential elements of our electronics industry, they did so with our drug industry. And it happened literally right under our noses, didn't it?
It really did, but I'll tell you, it took a long time to figure this out. I started working on this in 2014. It took 3 years to figure it out and to tell the story in China RX. And I predicted there that in the event of a natural disaster or global pandemic, the United States will stand in line behind other countries to try to...
What about if we see the drug labels are also deceptive, aren't they? Some of them make believe they're... In other words, they're manufactured in the U.S., but the raw ingredients are coming from China is a lot of the truth, right?
Well, it's all over the map. So let's take the medicines needed for caring for people, say if they have real severe coronavirus and they're in the hospital.
Okay.
So let's take those medicines.
Okay.
And if might be on a ventilator, mechanical ventilator to help you breathe. You might go into shock or have a secondary infection. So I was sitting having dinner with a bunch of people that actually make medicines.
Mm-hmm.
So where do the core chemicals come to make these medicines? I went around the room, each of them, they have 100 years experience doing the work they do, and each of them said 90%, 90%, 90%.
How did we get to this point of letting China take over our prescription drug market, Rosemary Gibson?
Well, first of all, nobody wanted to talk about it. And since China RX came out, in April 18, there's just no advocacy for it other than the public that's apoplectic about it and our military, because it's been hidden from us. But how it happened was, we went to generic drugs, which have been really a boon for all of us. But then when we opened up free trade with China in 2000 and they joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, I mean, who knew our trade policy would have such an impact? So it became...
But Rosemary, this is true about both parties, right? This is not limited to one party or the other. Both of them are owned by the China lobby, right?
This is across the board. Many mothers and fathers here own this, and it's been hidden, and nobody has been able to talk about it.
So let's say I use a lot of vitamin C powder, which I have for many, many years. I've known for years that it was made in Japan. It never bothered me because the Japanese are very high-quality drug manufacturing. But according to your book, the Chinese are now making most of the powdered vitamin C?
What they make is the ascorbic acid.
Yeah.
The active ingredient.
Of course.
I found it real. There's one small plant in New Jersey making a specialized ascorbic acid, and there's one small plant in Europe, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Because there was a time that we made most of our drugs here in America, correct?
Absolutely. I call it the industrial equivalent of home cooking. And now,
how do we get control back? Look, the book is so important, called China RX, Exposing the Risks of America's Dependence on China for Medicine. In some ways, this is not 100% new to me. I do have a PhD from UC Berkeley, but I have a previous master's degree in pharmacology, so I've seen this happening over the years, which is why I had Rosemary Gibson on the show today. I want America to wake up. Can we do anything about this?
Well, sure we can. The first thing we need to do is to bring some of our manufacturing back to the United States for those essential medicines. We don't have to make all of them here.
Mm-hmm.
We need, basic self-sufficiency. We have a thing called the Strategic National Stockpile that's there for emergencies.
Okay.
Like Hurricane Sandy or something like that. And 85% of that, what's in there, depends on China.
Good God.
Good thing. So
you have a chapter called The Vitamin C and Penicillin Cartels. They even control our penicillin raw ingredients?
Absolutely. Yes, this is how China does it. It's not just because China's cheaper. Chinese companies form cartels, they fix the prices, they sell them really cheap, below market, and they drive everybody out.
God.
And when they got global dominant market share, then they raise the price. And
that's what they did to our electronics industry originally in Japan. They dumped cars, they killed our car manufacturers, and they did the TVs and the electronics, dumping again. Now China's doing it with medicine, with antibiotics, chemotherapies, antidepressants, HIV/AIDS drugs, medicines for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, birth control, all made in China, sold in the U.S., and we all think they're made in the U.S.?
Well, there's no real country of origin labeling. It's all obfuscation.
Now, that's the beginning of the solution, I think, which is a country of origin labeling. Don't you think that would help?
That would help. But, I think the house is burning down, and so we've got to put out the fire. So if I had to put political energy into something, it's let's bring some of that manufacturing back here. We have tremendous technology to be able to make medicines here that's much cheaper, smaller environmental footprint, at lower cost. We have brilliant minds here. We've got to invest in them. And plus we have to, once we do it, we just can't put it on the open market. We have to have long-term contracts, say, with California public sector employees or the DOD, Department of Defense, or the VA, or the Strategic National Stockpile. Otherwise, China will come in and undercut. So we have to treat it as a national security asset.
I agree. Now, I have another issue here, which is generic drugs. I've always tried to avoid generic drugs my entire life because my former professor was the director of research at one of the major American pharmaceutical firms, and he told me generics are generally garbage. And now, according to your book, I'm finding out that most of the generics are made in China and India, and they are garbage. Is that true or false?
Well, here's the fact is that 9% of our generic drugs now, finished drugs, the pills we take, are made in China. 25% come from India. But India, its generic industry would collapse without Chinese core ingredients. So all roads lead to China. Back in the day, there were what was called authorized generics. So the company that made the brand name product went generic. You have that, quote, authorized generic that was made by that company, same formulation.
Okay.
Which one is better? Well, what I like is a new startup company up in New Haven, and they're an online pharmacy, and they test every product before they sell it. They test batches of each product.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want
in your book,
we have to test
I'm sorry, we're speaking about China RX, the risks of America's dependence on China for medicine, with the author, Rosemary Gibson. In your book, where you ask, are drugs from China safe? You quoted a longtime industry employee, Cheryl Neath, who said, and I'm quoting, I have stopped taking vitamins because the components are mostly Chinese made, even if the tablets or capsules are made in the United States. And there's minimal oversight of supplements like vitamins. That's still true, correct?
That's true, and that's from somebody who worked in the industry for more than 30 years.
So we're literally ingesting, it's like a Russian roulette. We don't know what we're putting in our bodies anymore.
Well, look what happened with the blood pressure medicine that had carcinogens in them. Millions of people around the world got it. They were recalled, the longest recall, I think, in FDA history. And
so is the Rosemary, is the FDA not doing its job? Are they involved with the problem?
the FDA is part of the problem, but the industry has allowed this to happen. And to me, it's like FAA and Boeing.
You have another chapter here, contaminated toothpaste in U.S. hospitals and hotels. What's that about?
That was a number of years ago where there was antifreeze put in products because it was a cheaper ingredient.
Oh, they put a little diethylene glycol in the toothpaste. Very nice.
Yes, like remember the pet food. Thousands of Americans, they lost their beloved dogs and cats because of pet food that was contaminated with an industrial chemical.
Wow.
And
I can see why there's such a movement in this country of people going back to the earth, of growing their own foods, growing their own herbs, and going off all medicines and vitamins altogether. It's a shocker to read this book.
Well,
have you shaken up the FDA with this book? Are they coming awake, Rosemary, at all? Are they coming around to you?
I will say that in a year and a half that this book has been out, I've had the privilege of briefing senior-level government officials and testifying on Capitol Hill, and people are shocked. And the sad part is that they are shocked that people did not know, or those that did know did nothing to act on it.
It's a huge topic that's requiring a Senate hearing, but they're too busy impeaching the president in Congress rather than protecting the American people. This is an example of an over-politicized nation. Instead of doing the people's work and protecting the people, they're attacking the other party, both sides, in order for personal gain. Don't you think we should have congressional hearings on this?
Well, there have been hearings, but we've got to get people to act. I look at who are the big purchasers of medicines. They're the hospitals,
okay. Yeah.
And I've done grand rounds at hospitals, and I ask the question, so why do you contract with suppliers that supply you with substandard medicines that are in persistent shortage? Why do you do that?
And the answer? Do they have an answer?
Still waiting.
You're still waiting for the answer. Well, this is a very alarming topic, but it's right up my alley because I have used vitamins myself for 40 years. I used to be a consultant to the vitamin industry, and I knew about good manufacturing practices, and I knew about shysters on Long Island who were pumping out pills in garages to make their fortunes. And I was trying to alert America to that, and I knew that there were good manufacturers of herbs. I knew there were shysters knocking out pills in Salt Lake City in their toilets and their garbage, making really junk until eventually the industry cleaned itself up. Is this ever going to clean up? Are we ever going to clean the pharmaceutical industry up, do you think, in our lifetime?
Well, I've been putting this out as a national security issue.
It is.
Poor quality medicines is not going to get people in Washington out of their chairs, but a national security threat will.
You're right.
So that's what I've been going with, and regrettably...
You have a chapter, these drugs can reach anyone, including the president. That's very interesting, isn't it?
That's right. Well, the medicines we're talking about are used by members of Congress, occupants of the White House, and all their staffs, and the military. There was a retired military guy who testified at a hearing. He was testifying as a commissioner in the U.S.-China Commission, and he said, I got contaminated blood pressure medicine. It was made in India. The ingredient came from China, and the ingredient had rocket fuel in it.
No, there you go. They had to get rid of it somehow. It's an alarming story and a worthwhile book, and the book is called China RX by Rosemary Gibson, Exposing the Risks of America's Dependence on China for Medicine. Rosemary, boy, you are an investigative reporter of the best kind, if you want to call yourself that. Whatever you call yourself, you're doing great work here. It's a shame that both parties are so corrupt that we're unlikely to see any changes in the very near future. Thank you so much, Rosemary, for being with us.
I want your listeners to know that we donate proceeds to good causes. No one paid me to do this book. Someone said people would pay you not to write it. Wow. So I hope people will go out and buy it. It's on Amazon. Share it with your family, your friends, your members of Congress, your doctors, your pharmacists. People need to know this, and call up your elected officials and say, we need to bring our medicine making back home. We don't want medicines made in China.
Good job. Good job, Rosemary Gibson. Thank you for being on the Savage Nation. Look, I just want to tie a little knot around this, if I can, before we leave this subject. Can you imagine a national health emergency where we needed penicillin and there was none, or China cut us off? Can you imagine? Now, I want you to understand why this is happening and how it happened. Take a look at Adam Schiff. Take a look at those on the Senate Intelligence Committee, on the House Intelligence Committee, and take a look at what they've done for the last number of years. Have they once talked about this? No. They've spent all of their time attacking Donald Trump. If you want to know what negligence is, look no further than the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committees, and you'll understand why this country is sinking into the muck, and it's not because of Donald Trump.
Home of borders, language, culture, the Savage Nation.